A single piece of parchment sealed with wax traveling 1,500 miles across mountains and deserts. Inside, words written by the most powerful man in the Western world, words he believed would save lives, words that instead signed the death warrants of 16,000 innocent people. The year is 324 AD. The Roman Emperor Constantine has just done the impossible. He's ended 3 centuries of Christian persecution in his empire. Churches are being rebuilt. Believers are coming out of hiding. It's a miracle. So naturally, flushed with divine victory, Constantine decides to share his good fortune with the world. He writes a letter to his rival, the king of Persia, asking him to show mercy to Christians living under Persian rule. Seems reasonable, right? A simple request for religious tolerance from one ruler to another. Except that letter, it became the single most catastrophic piece of diplomatic correspondence in ancient history. Within 15 years of its delivery, the Christian population of Persia would be drowning in their own blood. Bishops would be forced to watch 100 of their priests beheaded before their own execution. Entire communities would be wiped from existence. Bodies would be left to rot in the streets as a warning, and the killing wouldn't stop for 40 years. But here's what makes this story truly disturbing. The man who wrote that letter never intended any of this. Constantine genuinely believed he was helping. He thought his words would protect Christians, not condemn them. He had no idea that the very thing that saved his people would become the excuse to slaughter thousands of others. This is the story of the great slaughter of Persia, one of the most brutal religious persecutions in human history, and one that was accidentally triggered by an act of Christian charity. It's a story about how good intentions can pave the road to hell, how political paranoia can turn neighbors into executioners, and how faith, when twisted by power, becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will fundamentally change how you think about religious history. And I promise you, they never taught you this in school. To understand how Constantine's miracle became Persia's nightmare, we need to go back to Rome. For 3 centuries, being a Christian in the Roman Empire meant living on borrowed time, waiting for the knock on the door that could come at any moment. The Romans didn't just dislike Christians, they despised them. Why? Christians refused to worship Roman gods or acknowledge the emperor's divinity. This wasn't religious preference. It was treason. Rome blamed every disaster on Christian impiety and created horrifying propaganda to justify persecution. They accused Christians of cannibalism because of communion, of incest because they called each other brother and sister, of atheism because they rejected traditional gods. The persecution was sadistically creative. Under Nero in 64 Christians were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were covered in pitch and set on fire as human torches for his garden parties. Living people burning alive, screaming, while Roman nobility sipped wine. But nothing compared to 303 AD, when Emperor Diocletian launched the Great Persecution. Coordinated, calculated, industrial in scope, churches destroyed, scriptures burned. Christians, stripped of legal protection, bishops were roasted alive on metal grids, had their skin fled, or were placed in iron chairs, heated until their flesh melted and fused with the metal. One account describes 40 martyrs forced to stand naked on a frozen pond in winter. Roman soldiers built a warm bathhouse nearby, promising relief to any who renounced their faith. 39 froze to death. When one broke and ran to the bathhouse, a Roman guard, moved by their courage, stripped his armor, declared himself Christian, and took the deserter's place on the ice. For 8 years the killing continued. By 311 AD, it seemed like darkness would never end. And then everything changed. Enter Constantine. In 306 AD, he was just another ambitious general. But to become sole emperor, he'd have to defeat Maxentius, who controlled Rome with a significantly larger army. Military logic said Constantine should lose. Then came the vision. According to historian Eusebius, on the afternoon before battle at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine looked up and saw something impossible. A cross of brilliant light over the sun with Greek words inscribed Antica in this sign, conquer. His entire army witnessed it. That night Christ appeared in Constantine's dream, commanding him to paint the Chi-Rho symbol on his soldiers' shields. Constantine obeyed, ordering pagan soldiers to fight under a Christian symbol based on a dream. The battle was a massacre, but not of Constantine's forces. When Maxentius tried to retreat, his pontoon bridge collapsed. Thousands drowned, including Maxentius himself, who sank beneath the Tiber in full armor. Constantine rode into Rome as master of the Western Empire, and he gave all credit to the Christian God. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, making Christianity legal. After 3 centuries of hiding, Christians could worship openly, build churches without fear, own property. The state even returned confiscated assets. It was a miracle. Christian communities exploded with joy. Constantine became more than an emperor. He was God's chosen instrument, the man who ended their nightmare. He started building massive churches, gave bishops legal authority, exempted clergy from taxes. To Christians in Rome, Constantine was nothing short of a saint. But there was a problem. This miracle didn't happen in a vacuum. 1,500 meters east sat another empire, Rome's greatest enemy for centuries, an empire with its own state religion, its own reasons to fear a Christian Rome. And in that empire lived thousands of Christians. They were about to pay the price for Constantine's miracle. The Sasanian Empire of Persia was everything Rome was not. Where Rome was a multicultural patchwork, Persia was ancient, unified, built on Zoroastrianism, the world's first monotheistic religion. Zoroastrianism taught that the universe was a battleground between Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angro, the spirit of darkness. Fire was sacred, representing divine purity, and at the heart of Persian power stood the Magi, the Zoroastrian priesthood, who weren't just religious figures, but kingmakers, advisors, and administrators. To them, Zoroastrianism was the religion, the faith that defined Persian identity. So when Christianity began spreading into Persia through merchants and missionaries, the Magi viewed it as an existential threat, especially since these Christians had connections to believers in enemy Rome. On the Persian throne sat Shapur II, a king so destined. He was crowned in Uro when his father died while his mother was pregnant. He would reign for 70 years, brilliant, ruthless, obsessed with Persian glory. Rome and Persia had been locked in centuries of Cold War that frequently turned hot, and Shapur knew war was inevitable. Then suddenly Rome had a Christian emperor, openly favoring Christianity, building churches, giving Christians power. From Shapur's perspective, this was a strategic shift because Persia had Christians too, lots of them, and if they felt more loyalty to Christian Rome than to their Zoroastrian king, that was a problem. The Magi whispered in Shapur's ear that Christians were a fifth-column Roman sympathizers embedded in Persian society. They refused to participate in fire rituals, let sacred fires go out, cultural contamination from the West. Still, for 3 decades, Shapur tolerated them. They weren't numerous enough to warrant a crackdown. Then around 324 AD, a letter arrived from Constantine. Constantine had just defeated his last rival and now ruled the entire Roman Empire. He wanted to make a good impression on Shapur, extend friendship. The letter was carefully worded diplomatic. Constantine announced his Christian faith and boasted about how the Christian God had granted him victory. Then he mentioned that the fairest provinces of Persia were home to many Christians. This delighted him, he wrote, and he urged Shapur to cherish and protect these Christians. Constantine thought he was being generous, diplomatic, but read it through Persian eyes, through Shapur's eyes. The Roman emperor, Persia's greatest enemy, had just boasted about his Christian God's military victories, then claimed Persian territory was full of these same Christians, and asked Shapur to cherish them. It wasn't a request for tolerance, it was a claim of ownership. Constantine was declaring that Persia's Christians belonged to him, that they were his people living in Shapur's realm, that Shapur had a responsibility to protect them, not because they were Persian subjects, but because they shared Constantine's faith. In ancient geopolitics, where every word was analyzed for power plays, Constantine's letter was catastrophic. He had confirmed every fear the Magi had been whispering. He had painted a target on every Christian in Persia. Constantine tried to save them. Instead, he signed their death warrants. For 15 years, nothing happened. The letter sat like an unexploded bomb. Shapur had bigger problems. Wars on the eastern frontier, political intrigues. But in 337 AD, Constantine died. His sons carved up the Roman Empire and unity fractured. The Roman-Persian border heated up. War was coming and the Magi saw their opportunity. The persecution began with taxes. In 340 AD, Shapur announced a crippling double tax on Christians explicitly to fund war against Rome. He gave Bishop Shimon bar Sabai, head of the Persian church, an impossible order: collect this devastating tax from his impoverished flock. It was a loyalty test. Fund war against fellow Christians or refuse and prove you're a traitor. Shim refused. Shapur's response was swift. He arrested Shimon and charged him with treason, proclaiming, "Simon wants to make his disciples rebel against my kingdom and become servants of Caesar, their fellow believer." There it was. Constantine's 15-year-old letter had detonated. Shapur was explicitly connecting Persian Christians to Rome. Shimon was brought before Shapur personally. The king offered him a way out: abandon Christianity, worship the sun as Zoroastrians did, live with honors and riches. The elderly bishop refused. What happened next is recorded in the Syriac Acts of the Martyrs. Before Shimon's execution, Shapur ordered a special refinement. 100 of Shimon's priests were brought out, one by one, in front of him. They were beheaded. Imagine being forced to watch 100 people die, knowing your decision led to this moment, knowing you could stop it by renouncing your faith. She didn't break. He watched all 100 executions. He blessed each man as he was led to the block. And then on Good Friday, 341 AD, the day Christians commemorate Christ's crucifixion, they killed him too. The symbolism was deliberate, but Shim's death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of 40 years known as the Great Slaughter. This wasn't random violence. This was state-sponsored persecution with bureaucratic efficiency. The Magi compiled lists of Christians. Governors received orders to round them up. Military units enforced compliance. The pattern was systematic. Target clergy first. Bishops, priests, deacons. Cut off the head and the body dies. When they refused to convert, they were executed, crucified, stoned. The sources describe horrific tortures. People tied between bent trees that were released, tearing victims apart. Red-hot metal applied to flesh. Nails driven under fing, nails. After the clergy came ordinary believers. Entire communities faced a choice: convert or die. Many chose death. The chronicles described mass martyrdoms. Dozens executed together singing hymns. But the Magi reserved special fury for converts from Zoroastrianism to Christianity. Apostasy was an automatic death sentence. No trial, no mercy. These converts were hunted with special zeal and executed in ways designed to maximize terror. Their bodies were left unburied as warnings. The persecution ebbed and flowed over 4 decades, intensifying during wartime when Christians were seen as security threats. Conservative estimates place the death toll at 16,000, though some chronicles claim tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. The truth lies somewhere in between, but we'll never know. Many victims were never recorded. Entire communities vanished from history. By the time persecution wound down in the 3800s, the Church of the East was shattered. Bishops fled to Rome. Churches lay in ruins. Survivors went underground knowing discovery meant death. The irony is unbearable. Constantine's letter meant to protect these Christians gave Persia the perfect justification to destroy them. The Persian church survived, but barely. Survivors learned painful lessons about visibility and neutrality. When persecution eased in the late 4th century, they rebuilt carefully, emphasizing their Persian identity and loyalty. They developed distinct theological traditions, separate from Rome to avoid any appearance of Western sympathies. The Church of the East eventually spread across Asia, reaching China by the 7th century, but it always carried the scars of the Great Slaughter, the memory of what happens when you're seen as allied with a foreign power. Constantine never learned about the consequences. He died in 337, just as Shapur's paranoia solidified into policy. No one ever told him his interfaith diplomacy had backfired catastrophically. He died believing he'd protected Christians everywhere. And that's the most disturbing part. Constantine's intentions were genuinely good. He wasn't trying to get anyone killed. He saw his miraculous conversion, his victories, his legalization of Christianity, and thought, I should extend this protection everywhere, even to Christians under my enemies. It was an act of faith, of compassion, of solidarity, with fellow believers suffering under hostile governments, and it killed thousands because Constantine made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because Christianity saved Rome, because his God granted him victory, because Christianity was the rising religion, he could speak for all Christians everywhere. He couldn't. And Persian Christians paid the price. Shapur wasn't just a monster, he was a ruler facing genuine strategic dilemmas. Rome and Persia had fought for centuries. Now Rome had a Christian emperor claiming interest in Persia's Christian population. From Shapur's perspective, what was he supposed to do? Ignore it. Pretend religious identity didn't create political loyalties. He calculated that security required eliminating the threat. In the brutal logic of ancient geopolitics, his decision was predictable. The tragedy is he was probably wrong. Most Persian Christians weren't Roman sympathizers. They were people trying to survive. Constantine's letter didn't reveal an existing conspiracy. It created the perception of one where none existed. Thousands died not for what they'd done, but for what two emperors thought they might do in a hypothetical war. Here's what this means for us. Good intentions aren't enough. Constantine wanted to help. His heart was right, but he didn't consider consequences, didn't think how his letter would be received by a paranoid rival. We do this constantly, see suffering, want to help, rush in, without understanding local dynamics. Constantine's letter is a 700-year-old warning about good intentions without strategic thinking. Identity becomes dangerous when it crosses borders. Christianity created transnational identity. Persian Christians felt connected to Roman Christians, beautiful, religiously threatening politically. It meant Persian subjects potentially felt more loyalty to a foreign emperor than their own king. We see this today with religious, ideological, and ethnic identities that create solidarity, but also state suspicion. Persecution is rarely about religion alone. Great slaughter happened because religion became entangled with politics, power, and war. Shapa didn't persecute Christians over theology. He did it because Constantine's letter made Christianity a security issue. Religious persecution spikes during political crisis. When states feel threatened, religious minorities with transnational connections become easy targets. The powerful never see the consequences. Constantine died comfortable, never witnessing the bodies piled up in Persia, never meeting refugees fleeing persecution. His letter sparked, "This is the privilege of power," making decisions affecting distant people without witnessing consequences. History's tragedies made perfect sense to those involved. Shapur wasn't crazy. Constantine wasn't evil. The Magi weren't just sadists. They operated according to their time's logic, making rational decisions given their information. 16,000 people died anyway. That's the real horror. Not that it was senseless, but that it made perfect sense. It was the logical outcome of empires in conflict, religion in competition, and leaders who couldn't see past their assumptions. 17 centuries later, we're still looking at a letter that killed 16,000 people. Constantine's miracle in the West became a massacre in the East. His triumph became their tragedy. His good intentions paved a road to hell, so literal, we're still walking on the bones. The Great Slaughter stands as one of history's most devastating examples of how faith, politics, and power combine to create catastrophe. It reminds us that religious freedom is fragile, that good intentions need strategic wisdom, and that the powerful must think through consequences, especially when trying to help. Persian Christians endured 40 years of systematic persecution because two emperors couldn't see past their perspectives. Constantine saw himself as Christianity's protector and couldn't imagine endangering Christians elsewhere. Shapur saw threats everywhere and couldn't distinguish between conspiracies and innocent believers. The people caught in the middle paid the price. If this story disturbed you, challenged you, made you see history differently, that's exactly what we're here for. Subscribe to Crimson Historians and hit that notification bell because we're committed to uncovering the historical truths that mainstream education buries. The story's too dark, too complex, too uncomfortable to fit the sanitized narratives you learned in school. We give voice to the silenced victims of history. We expose the brutal ironies that shaped our world. We connect the dots between ancient atrocities and modern patterns that most people miss. This channel exists because the truth matters, even when it's ugly, even when it's disturbing, even when it forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about power, faith, and human nature. Every video on this channel is meticulously researched, drawing from primary sources, academic scholarship, and historical accounts that rarely see the light of day. We don't sensationalize, we illuminate. We don't exploit tragedy. We honor it by making sure these stories are never forgotten. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what other historical ironies should we investigate? What unintended consequences change the course of civilizations? What forgotten massacres deserve to be remembered? Your suggestions drive our content. And some of the most powerful stories we've covered came directly from this community. And if you found value in this video, if it made you think, if it gave you a perspective you've never considered, share it. Send it to someone who loves history. Post it in your community groups. These stories need to reach people. The algorithm won't always help us, so we depend on viewers like you to spread the truth. Thanks for watching, and remember this: the past isn't dead. It's not even past. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes with terrifying consistency. The patterns we've explored today, good intentions weaponized, transnational identities turned into death sentences, power wielded without accountability. These patterns are alive right now, playing out in real time across our world. The Great Slaughter happened because people failed to see past their assumptions, failed to consider unintended consequences, failed to recognize that their truth wasn't universal truth. Don't make the same mistake. Don't let good intenti blind you to the damage they might cause. Don't assume that power, even when used with the purest motives, comes without a cost someone else will pay. Study history not to feel superior to the past, but to recognize yourself in it. To see how ordinary people, rational people, well-intentioned people can participate in or enable atrocities simply by not thinking through the consequences of their actions. That's the lesson. That's why we do this. That's why these stories matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning the narratives you've been fed. This is Crimson Historians, where we dig up the truths history tried to bury.